Hi guys, so in this video, I'd like to present to you Alexander Dugin's thoughts on Christianity and Neoplatonism, chapter 6 of his book, Political Platonism, The Philosophy of Politics. This is a short chapter. It's structured as 10 theses. Let's go over them. Number 1, Neoplatonism is the intellectual milieu in which the formation of Christian theology took place. It is incorrect to reduce Neoplatonism, Dugin writes, only to Origen or Dionysius the Areopagite and to the Christian mystics. It's much broader than that. Neoplatonism, understood in a Christian way, is precisely the foundation of the conceptual apparatus of the entire Nicene dogmatics, in other words, the Nicene Creed. And so familiarity with Neoplatonism as a philosophy and also as a way of thought and a way of life is absolutely necessary for the Christian. Okay, that's the first idea. Again, Neoplatonism is the intellectual milieu in which the formation of Christian theology took place, and therefore familiarity with Neoplatonism is absolutely necessary for the Christian. Next point, Neoplatonism relates to Orthodoxy in various ways, and we can understand it to mean different things both broadly and narrowly. In the broadest sense, as the thought of the Hellenes and Hellenism as such, i.e. the milieu, social, intellectual, cultural, philosophical, aesthetic, in which Christianity was established. As the Alexandrian school of thought, from Philo of Alexandria to Clement and Origen, like Plotinus, Origen was a student of Ammonius Saccas. So this is now Dugin telling us all the different ways in which we can understand Neoplatonism in relationship to Christian Orthodoxy. For instance, as the allegorical and symbolic interpretation of the Bible, as Philo of Alexandria's Hellenistic interpretation of the Bible, as Origen, again, O-R-I-G-E-N, not origin like the beginning, but origin like the author, as the framework of the Cappadocian Fathers, as the influence of Plotinus, Porphyry, and so on Christian authors, and so on, as hesychasm and the theory of uncreated light, as Gemistus Pletho in the Mistress school, as St. Maximus the Confessor. So these are all kinds of different examples of Neoplatonism in Orthodoxy, different ways that you can approach that topic. That's Dugin's second point. The third point is that there's a Greek derivation of Orthodoxy, some of which he mentioned here, but there was also a Neoplatonism in the West. And it's not possible, he says, to make a sharp distinction before the Great Schism. So we should also include the Western Fathers, St. Augustine, Boethius, and Erigena. In other words, what Dugin is saying here is that as you try to understand the relationship between Neoplatonism and Christianity, you will be tempted to go to the Eastern Church to find the most obvious or conspicuous sorts of traces of Neoplatonism and Christianity, but you should include as well the Western Fathers in your analysis of this issue. Dugin's fourth point is that Platonism also influenced scholasticism after the Great Schism, but in a different Catholic context, and served as a specific worldview in the Renaissance, so in Ficino and in Mirandola. In other words, you have the influence of Platonism not only in the Western Fathers and Eastern Fathers, but even after the split in the Renaissance period in the thought of these figures. The fifth point concerns Russian Christianity in particular. He says, in the era of the emergence of Russian religious philosophy in the 19th and 20th centuries, all these lines, one way or another, influenced sophiology, a way of thinking about the divine Sophia in relationship to Christian doctrine, and everything connected with it. That means, first, that Russian philosophy is inextricably connected with Neoplatonism, and second, that so too is the entire culture of the Silver Age, again, 19th, 20th century. So what he's really trying to convey here is the omnipresence or the huge significance or the high degree of relevance of Neoplatonism to Russian religious philosophy. His sixth point or reflection is the following. He says, it is appropriate to ask, where is the place of Neoplatonism in all its senses in contemporary Christian self-consciousness? All right, so we had the Eastern and Western Fathers, you have the post-schism Catholics, you have contemporary or 19th and 20th century Russian religious philosophy, but what about in contemporary Christian consciousness? He says, in the West, Catholic thought, even in its most conservative form, as a rule, stops with Thomism and scholasticism, meaning the philosophy of Aquinas, while the mystical tendencies of a more radical Platonism are examined in a different, either scientific or spiritualistic context, meaning outside of conservative Christian thought. In the East and in Orthodoxy, on the other hand, one gets the impression that the theme of Neoplatonism is not systematically emphasized at all. So Dugin looks around at Eastern and Western Christianity today, and he sees that Neoplatonism has not been thematized adequately and emphasized systematically in the way that it should be. This leads him to point 7, that for contemporary Russian Orthodoxy, a new familiarity with Neoplatonism and its various aspects and dimensions is vitally important. We can draw up a plan for its step-by-step realization, he says, and here are the points that he mentions. Platonic studies, including study of the Greek language and original Platonic terminology. That's a pillar of the study of Neoplatonism and Christianity, is just straightforward Platonic studies. Then the study of the Neoplatonic heritage, meaning Plotinus, Iamblichus, and Proclus, first and foremost for him, of Porphyry and others as well. The delineation of Neoplatonic tendencies in the most important lines of Orthodox thought and dogma. So you get Plato, then the foundations of Neoplatonism, and then the delineation of Neoplatonic tendencies in the most important lines of Orthodox thought and dogma. The reconsideration of Russian religious philosophy, figures like Solovyov, Bulgakov, Florensky, and Losev, from the perspective of a broad knowledge of Platonism. So now applying this new familiarity with Plato, Neoplatonism, and Neoplatonic tendencies in Christianity to the study of Russian religious philosophy. And then, as he puts it in his final point under Thesis 7, the creation of a school of Orthodox Neoplatonism. Turning then to his 8th reflection, an extremely important element is the task of the precise reconstruction of the condemnation of Platonism and Origenism, again, Origen, sorry, I don't know if the G is hard, Origen, in the time of Justinian, the condemnation of John Italus, the hesychast controversy, and the battle against Imaslavia, okay, onomatodoxy. Imaslavia, I'll put the word in the description. You can look it up and get some sense of what that controversy was. But what Dugin is saying here is that part of the familiarity of the relation between Neoplatonism and Christianity is a reconsideration of some of these fundamental disputes and fundamental moments of condemnation. Why? He says it's necessary to reconstruct precisely the context, meaning, and aims of all these movements in order to execute a deconstruction. We must understand the structure and ideational bases of the criticism of Platonism at various stages of the establishment of Christian dogma and Christian history as such. So wherever there was a controversy that came down against the influence of Plato in the church, that should be studied, understood, reconstructed, and thought through. To repeat, we must understand the structure and ideational bases of the criticism of Platonism at various stages of the establishment of Christian dogma and Christian history as such. 9th point of 10 is the following. It is useful to carry out a comparative analysis of how Neoplatonist tendencies played out in other monotheistic religions. In Islam, then he gives examples, the Al-Falasifa, the Ishraq or Shiite Gnosis, and in Judaism, and the Kabbalah is the example he gives. Moreover, it's important to study more carefully the influence of Neoplatonism on the Renaissance and numerous mystico-occult trends from Bruno to the Rosicrucians and Hermetics. Now, incidentally, I'll just mention here in passing, I'm reading this book, Theological Origins of Modernity, recommended reading. Good author. His other book on Hegel, history, and Heidegger is very good. And you learn from the Theological Origins of Modernity, if you didn't already know, the relationship, for example, of Descartes to Rosicrucianism and of other thinkers like that. So this mystical occult background is present even in the foundations of the modern scientific thinkers, Francis Bacon, Descartes. So that's an interesting connection. Okay, to repeat, it's important to study more carefully the influence of Neoplatonism on the Renaissance and numerous mystico-occult trends from Bruno to the Rosicrucians and Hermetics. By the way, I can tell you that in Dugin's book called Noomachia, Hermeticism, Gnosticism, these things are studied very carefully, as in other contexts are, for instance, alchemy in Dugin's thought. So he sees all of these kind of occult or mystic. It's one of the things that attracted to me the first time that I ever read about him was his interest in the mystic and the occult, symbolism, and trying to interpret and understand it from the point of view, well, on its own terms, as well as from the point of view of Platonic, Neoplatonic philosophy. So 10th point in this chapter, chapter 6 of Political Platonism, this chapter is called Christianity and Neo-Platonism. We get the 10th point. It is the following. The significance of Neoplatonism is fundamentally understated in contemporary orthodoxy. Intellectualism is not the sole path of the Christian, granted. But the absence of intellect or systematic emotional weak-mindedness and blind devotionalism are not likely for their part to be the correct paths. Not everyone understands Christian doctrine deeply. Neoplatonic philosophy can help us understand it better. Okay, so that was Alexander Dugin making his case for the importance of Neoplatonism, both in understanding the church fathers, East and West, and in understanding other church luminaries, finally in understanding contemporary debates over Platonism and Christianity in Russia and out of Russia, as well as previous controversies concerning the place of this pagan thought in the Christian system of thought. Neoplatonism and Christianity from Political Platonism, Philosophy of Politics, I translated. You might like it, and there will be more videos on it in the coming days. All right, Michael Millerman, millermanschool.com. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think about that, and see you in the next video.